This hearing will now come to order, and I want to welcome everyone to today's hearing to review a draft committee bill on the amendment, or rather to amend and strengthen the National Nanotechnology Initiative. I think this is one of the most important hearings that we're going to have this year. I know that we have a busy day for members in other committees, but we have a lot of staff watching this on TV, and so there'll be a lot of information that will be communicated from the hearing, and I appreciate you being here. The term revolutionary technology has become a cliche, but nanotechnology truly is revolutionary. We stand at the threshold of an age in which materials and devices can be fashioned atom by atom to satisfy specific designed requirements. Nanotechnology-based applications are arising that were not even imagined a decade ago. Nanotechnology is not a single technology, but is a collection of tools and concepts for observing, controlling, and manipulating matter at the atomic scale. The range of potential applications is broad and will have enormous consequences for the electronics, energy transformation and storage, materials and medicine and health, to name just a few. Indeed, the scope of this technology is so broad as to leave virtually no product untouched. The Science and Technology Committee recognized the promise of nanotechnology early on, holding our first hearing a decade ago to review federal activities in the field. The committee was subsequently instrumental in the development and enactment of a statute in 2003 that authorized the Interagency National Nanotechnology Initiative, or the NNI. The 2003 statute put in place formal interagency planning, budgeting, and coordinating mechanisms for the NNI. It now receives funding from 13 agencies and has a budget of $1.5 billion for fiscal year 2008, which represents a doubling of the budget over the last 5 years. The NNI statute also provides for formal reviews of the content and management of the program of the national academies and by designated advisory committees of non-governmental experts. Their assessments of the NNI have been generally positive. The cooperation and planning processes among the participating agencies in the NNI have been also largely effective. The NNI has led to productive cooperative research efforts across a spectrum of disciplines. It has established a network of national facilities for support of nanoscale research and development. Therefore, the NNI does not require extensive renovation. The draft bill leaves its major features unchanged, but does adjust some important priorities and strengthens some specific aspects of the program. I would like to highlight two key features of the bill. The first area is risk reduction. Nanotechnology is advancing rapidly. At least 600 products have entered commerce that contain nanoscale materials, including aerosols and cosmetics. It's important for the successful development of nanotechnology that potential downsides of technology be addressed from the beginning in a straightforward and open way. We know too well that the negative public perceptions about the safety of technology can have serious consequences for its acceptance and use. This has been the case with nuclear power, genetically modified foods, and stem cell therapies. The science base is not now available to pin down what types of engineered nanomaterials may be dangerous, although early studies show some are potentially harmful. We don't yet know what characteristics of these materials are most significant to determine their effect on living things or the environment, nor do we even have the instruments for effective monitoring the presence of such materials in the air or water. Although the NNI has from its beginning realized the need to include activities for increasingly understanding of the environmental and safety aspects of nanotechnology, it has been slow to put in place a well-designed, adequately funded, and effectively executed research program. The environmental and safety component of the NNI must be improved by quickly developing and implementing a strategy research plan that specifies near-term and long-term goals, sets milestones and timeframes for meeting near-term goals, clarifies agencies' roles in implementing the plan, and allocate sufficient resources to accomplish the goals. This is the essential first step for the development of nanotechnology to ensure that sound science guides the formulation of regulatory rules and requirements. It will reduce the current uncertainty that inhibits commercial development of nanotechnology and will provide a sound basis for future rulemaking. I am interested in hearing the views of our witnesses on the provisions of the bill relevant to the development and implementation of an effective environmental, health, and safety research component of the NNI, and particularly on whether it would be beneficial to specifically set aside a portion of the overall NNI budget for this purpose, as is proposed in this bill. The second area of legislation I want to highlight involves capturing the economic benefits of nanotechnology. Too often, the U.S. has led in the basic research on the frontiers of science and technology, but has failed to capitalize on the commercial developments flowing from new discoveries. The NNI has so far invested approximately $7 billion over 7 years in basic research that is providing new tools for manipulation of matter at the nanoscale and is increasing our understanding of the behavior of engineered nanoscale materials and devices. Increased consideration should now be given to support of efforts to foster the transfer of new discoveries to commercial products and processes. The draft bill includes provisions to encourage use of nanotechnology facilities by companies for prototyping and proof of concept studies, and specifies steps for increasing the number of nanotechnology-related projects supported under the Small Business Innovation Research Program and by the Technology Innovation Program established under the Competes Act. To increase the relevance and value of the NNI, the draft bill also authorizes large-scale, focused, multi-agency research and development initiatives in areas of national need. For example, such efforts could be organized around developing a replacement for the silicon-based transistor, developing new technology-based devices for harvesting solar energy, or nanoscale sensors for detecting cancer. The Draft NNI Amendments Act was developed on the basis of recommendations from the formal reviews of the NNI by the National Academies of Science and by the President's Council of Advisors on the Science and Technology, which currently acts as the external advisory committee to NNI. It also incorporates recommendations from witnesses, testimony from NNI hearings during this and the previous Congress, and from comments and recommendations resulting from staff discussions with various stakeholder groups. This legislation is still a work in progress. Today, I look forward to the observations of our witnesses and invite them to give the committee their recommendations for ways to improve the bill. And I want to thank our witnesses for their attention at this hearing and look forward to our discussion. The chair now recognizes Mr. Ehlers for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But first, I must mention that Ranking Member Ralph Hall is indisposed today, which means he's sick, and it takes quite a bit to keep a Texan down. So he sends his regrets, and Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that Mr. Hall's statement be entered into the record, and I will proceed with my own statement. I'm pleased the committee is holding this important hearing today. The purpose of this hearing is to discuss draft reauthorization legislation designed to improve the management and coordination of the Cross-Agency National Nanotechnology Initiative, better known as the NNI. Of particular interest to this committee is the prioritization of environmental, health, and safety research and communication of that research to the public. Since the original act was put in place in 2003, we have heard from a number of witnesses that EHS research may need to be increased to ensure a steady pathway for both the nano industry success and public acceptance of new technologies. Consequently, I am pleased that the draft legislation elevates the environmental health and safety component of the NNI. At the same time, I want to make sure that we craft policy which allows for EHS research to be embedded into product development. We know that each nanoproduct and process may behave differently, and therefore independent EHS research may not always inform a seemingly parallel project. I am also interested in hearing from our witnesses about some of the proposed changes to nanotechnology education, particularly the changes to existing education programs at the National Science Foundation. Given the challenging funding environment for these programs, I want to make sure such changes would benefit students and classroom teachers and not eat away at other important programs. I look forward to hearing the insights of our witnesses on how we can strengthen the National Nanotechnology Initiative so that the United States can remain a leader in nanotechnology. Chairman, with that, I yield back the balance.
Thank you, Dr. Ehlers. It's come to my attention that Mr. Honda, a former and valued member of the Science Committee, is in the audience, and I would ask unanimous consent that Mr. Honda be allowed to join this hearing if he so chooses. And you're welcome to take a seat here. I would also remind Mr. Honda, as he remembers from being a member of the committee, that the current members will have precedence in terms of asking questions, but we certainly want his expert, and we're glad that he's here to join us. No objection. Mr. Honda will join us. At this time, I would like to introduce our witnesses. First, Mr. Floyd Kvamme is the co-chair of the President's Council of Advisors in Science Technology. Mr. Sean Murdock is the Executive Director for the NanoBusiness Alliance. Mr. Joseph Krajcik, he is the Associate Dean of Research and Professor of Education at the University of Michigan. Mr. Ehlers, I hope you'll be happy about that. Dr. Andrew Maynard is the Chief Science and Advisor for the Project of Emerging Nanotechnology at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. Dr. Raymond is the Manager of Toxicology at BASF Corporation and is also representing the American Chemistry Council. And finally, Dr. Robert Doering. Dr. Doering is a Senior Fellow and Research Strategy Manager at Texas Instruments and is also representing the Semiconductor Industry Association. Thank you for joining us today, and we have a very distinguished panel. And at this point, we will open our first round of questions, and the chair, or excuse me, I guess we should hear from our witnesses, shouldn't we? Let's begin.
I think that
I will carry on, okay? My name is Floyd Kvamme. I'm co-chair of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, a high-level group from academia, industry, and other entities experienced in leading successful science and technology enterprises. My remarks today are my own, but I'm confident that my fellow PCAST members feel similarly on the issues under discussion. Last week, PCAST released its second review of the National Nanotechnology Initiative, or NNI, and I'd like to reference that report in full for this hearing's record, as it includes a detailed assessment of the NNI program activities and coordination developed through extensive review over the last 18 months. We're here today to talk about the NNI and the committee's draft legislation to reauthorize this important program. What is nanotechnology? If one drops the nano part of the word, we're talking about technology. Technology today invades every part of our economy. Not only computers and communications, but healthcare, energy, transportation, education, and in a word, everything. As a result, a technology initiative is about a wide and varied range of industries and applications. Nanotechnology is simply the continuing development of technology to applications which take advantage of the unique properties of some materials and is being applied in all of the applications mentioned above and will undoubtedly make many of the products in these applications better, either in performance, cost, or both. Establishment of the NNI was a very good idea. I commend the Congress and this committee for authorizing this initiative in 2003. In both our first report in 2005 and now our second one, we have had to deal not only with the diversity that is nanotechnology, but also a wide range of federal agencies involved in supporting and or conducting nano R&D. The initiative did not set up a new agency with a specific budget. Rather, it set up coordination, planning, and review mechanisms intended to ensure individual agency activities in nanotechnology are effectively supporting program and government-wide goals. The legislation formally established the Coordinating Office, which raises its budget through contributions from the various agencies with nanotechnology R&D budgets. Agencies with primarily regulatory missions have also taken an active role in the initiative and have contributed to its activities. This strong interagency coordination, a premier example of any such federal R&D initiative, has been central to the success to date of the NNI. Appropriate and informed support for environmental health and safety, EHS research, within the NNI has responsibility to demand strong coordination. With respect to EHS, PCAST found that the NNI's approach has been sound. The interagency coordination process identified EHS research needs, mapped those needs to current activities to identify potential research opportunities, and then prioritize those opportunities to inform budget and planning activities. The provision in the draft reauthorizing legislation that the NNI collectively allocate a minimum of 10% of its nanotechnology R&D to EHS-related research is, however, problematic in both practice and principle. In practice, the funding of each agency is independent of the NNI. The NSET subcommittee provides the base for coordinating member agency activities and planning efforts, but it does not direct NNI funding. Further, it is not reasonable to exclusively designate projects or portions of projects as exclusively EHS or not. The reporting structure of the NNI by PCAs enables characterization and analysis of the research portfolio that is sufficient for policy and planning purposes. The current funding mechanisms and structure makes it difficult for me to see how this minimum funding across the program is practical. In principle, this set-aside appears to be arbitrary and not based on a sound scientific analysis of the NNI portfolio of relevant research, including extensive relevant research not reported in the EHS program component area, and what is strategically needed. Instead, support should be guided by the identified gaps and sequential priorities identified in the EHS research strategy. Like all other aspects of the NNI, EHS research funding decisions should be determined by identified R&D objectives, as is currently the approach of the agencies within the NNI. Scientifically determined, strategically planned priorities, not arbitrary percentages, should guide funding for all nanotechnology research. With respect to the oversight provisions, the breadth and depth of the high-level experience of the PCAST in its role as the National Nanotechnology Advisory Panel, combined with the detailed expertise of the ad hoc Technology Advisory Group, has worked quite well the last 5 years in providing functional oversight for the NNI and directly advising the President on nanotechnology. The proposed bill should maximize the flexibility for the next administration in establishing its own advisory structure. As the current PCAST prepares to pass the baton to the next administration, we will suggest they incorporate a similar approach to oversight, leveraging the expertise of a large technical advisory group, whether they be within PCAST or separate. In summary, the NNI as currently structured is a productive and effective program and a model of interagency coordination. Our newly released report makes recommendations for improvement, but finds the program basically sound. Industry is benefiting from its research. A clear strategy has been developed for nanotechnology-related EHS research, and EHS guidelines are being presented to guide industry. International cooperation is happening. The Coordinating Office and NNI participating agencies have responded to past recommendations from PCAST as well as the national academies and have strengthened the program. Agencies participate voluntarily because they derive benefit from doing so. A reauthorization that avoids overly prescriptive guidance, like the arbitrary EHS funding floor, and bureaucratic micromanagement, such as costly database requirements, will further strengthen and promote interagency coordination that has been vital to the success of the NNI to date. This approach would confirm the goals as presented in the original legislation and commend the agencies for their coordinated efforts to maintain the leadership and competitiveness of the U.S. in nanotechnology. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Murdock, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Gordon. Chairman Gordon, Ranking Member Hall, and the members of the House Committee on Science and Technology, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to testify on the National Nanotechnology Initiative Amendments Act of 2008. My name is Sean Murdock, and I'm the Executive Director of the NanoBusiness Alliance. The NanoBusiness Alliance is the premier nanotechnology policy and commercialization advocacy group in the United States. Members span multiple stakeholder groups and traditional industry sectors. including newly formed startups, Fortune 500 companies, academic research institutions, and public-private partnerships working to drive economic development and growth through nanotechnology. This wide group of stakeholders has come together because we believe that nanotechnology will be one of the key drivers of quality of life improvements, economic growth, and business success in the 21st century. The Alliance provides a collective voice and a vehicle for efforts to advance the benefits of nanotechnology across our economy and society. The NanoBusiness Alliance strongly supports the National Nanotechnology Initiative Amendments Act of 2008 as drafted. This committee has long recognized that nanotechnology is one of the most important frontiers of science and technology, and that nanotechnology has the potential to dramatically improve our quality of life, our health, our environment, and our economy. The National Nanotechnology Initiative, which this committee led Congress in authorizing in 2003, provided a framework for coordinated federal research and development. That authorization bill, the 21st Century Nanotech R&D Act, focused on fundamental nanotechnology research. Now, 5 years later, it is time to reauthorize and update this legislation. Much has changed in the past half-decade. Nanotechnology is beginning to move from the laboratory to the store shelf. American nanotechnology companies are beginning to shift from prototype development to large-scale manufacturing. Employers are beginning to look for nanotechnology qualified workers. And the public is beginning to take notice of nanotechnology with its many benefits and some potential risks, which need to be examined and managed. That the landscape has changed so much in 5 years is in no small part due to the success of the National Nanotechnology Initiative itself. But its success at jumpstarting the nation's nanotechnology development means that the initiative now needs to be updated to reflect 5 years of growth. We are pleased that the committee has thought carefully about how best to bring the National Nanotechnology Initiative up to date. The draft legislation will improve the initiative's capabilities in several key areas, including translational research and development for commercialization, nanotechnology education, and environmental health and safety research. As members of the committee know, America faces intense global competition in every field, but nowhere is this competition more intense than the field of nanotechnology. Its economic development potential has led countries across Europe and Asia to make large and strategic investments in nanotechnology research and development. The stated goal in many of these countries is to dominate one or more sectors and change their geopolitical position. Russia has announced a $7 billion nanotechnology initiative that will spend nearly $750 million more on nanotechnology research each year than the United States. China is on purchase power parity basis approximately $1 billion and growing rapidly. The United States continues to lead the world in fundamental nanotechnology research, but over the last 5 years we've seen our foreign competitors demonstrate that they're becoming equally capable in commercializing the technology. We must reverse this trend. While we cannot and should not adopt our competitors' model of direct state investment in private companies, we can and should take steps to ensure that innovative American companies have unfettered access to American research, that they are able to commercialize that research efficiently and effectively. We should encourage programs such as the SBIR and STTR program and the Technology Innovation Program. We should focus our efforts on goal-oriented research in areas of national importance, and we should do everything we can to see that federal, state, and private resources are working together to bring these technologies to market. The draft legislation does this. It retools the National Nanotechnology Initiative to focus more on applied research while maintaining the commitment to fundamental research. It supports large-scale collaborative efforts to develop nanotechnology solutions to key public policy challenges such as energy efficiency, environmental cleanup, and healthcare. And it updates the initiative to include databases and other information sharing mechanisms that actually help companies and the public understand what resources and opportunities to engage are available. The NanoBusiness Alliance is firmly committed to advancing nanotechnology education. We cannot expect to compete in a global economy if we are not generating nanotechnology literate students who will go on to become the leaders and the workers in the nanotechnology economy of the future. We need to inspire American students to choose science tracks in high school and then provide them with hands-on nanotechnology opportunities in colleges and technical colleges. As it stands, we are educating foreign students, then sending them home to compete against us. According to the NSF, foreign students on temporary visas earn 32% of all science and engineering doctorates awarded in the United States. The last year for which data is available, foreign students earned 55% of engineering doctorates. Many of these students will ultimately return home. We must develop more domestic scientific talent if we are to lead in nanotechnology commercialization over the long haul. We believe that inspiration and inquiry-driven learning are key to accomplishing that. The Alliance supports putting nanotechnology tools into the hands of students in community colleges and campuses so that they can see firsthand what nanotechnology is and why it's important. The Alliance also supports integrating local nanotechnology businesses into the program, and many of our members are already reaching out to schools to do that. In terms of environmental health safety research, nanotechnology has tremendous potential benefits for the environment, health, and safety. But as we develop nanotechnology applications, we must do so responsibly, identifying and addressing any risk or hazard associated with the technology before it causes environmental health or safety problems. The Alliance has called for the National Nanotechnology Initiative to include a comprehensive, fully funded environmental health safety research program, and this legislation does that. The NanoBusiness Alliance believes that the environmental health safety research should be fully funded based on clear, carefully constructed research strategy. While we believe that 10% of the total funding for nanotechnology research and development is a reasonable estimate of the resources that will be required to execute the plan, we also believe that the actual resource levels should be driven by a strategic plan, as they will vary significantly across agencies. The Alliance appreciates the Committee's commitment to developing a broader understanding of nanotechnology before erecting an extensive new regulatory structure. We hope that Congress will see the wisdom of the Committee's approach and will use this authorized by this as a basis for deciding what, if anything, is needed. I'd like to thank the Committee once again for the opportunity to testify and its leadership on this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Dr. Krajcik, you're recognized.
Chairperson Gordon, Mr. Elders, and members of the committee, I'm honored to present testimony on the National Nanotechnology Initiative Amendments Act of 2008. My name is Joe Krajcik, and I've been involved in science education for the last 34 years. First as a high school science teacher, and now as professor of science education at the University of Michigan. I'm currently co-PI in a National Science Foundation Center for teaching and learning in nanoscale science and engineering. Because of this, I will speak primarily about the educational components of the Act. Let me begin by stating that we live in a very exciting time with respect to advances in science and technology. We also live in a very exciting time with respect to education, because we now know more about how people learn than ever before. The advances of nanoscale science and the global economy in which we live challenge the education community to help all children develop deeper and more useful understanding of core science ideas that underlie nanoscience. Unfortunately, despite what we know about learning, the current education system is failing to produce a populace scientifically literate enough to understand the advances of nanoscience and to prepare a workforce for the new jobs and professions that are emerging from this field. Children in our country continue to lag behind in science and mathematics on international assessments. Perhaps most unfortunately, the most underserved children are in locations where typically children do not succeed in science, our nation's large urban cities and rural areas. As a nation, as we become more diverse, the challenge of how to provide quality science instruction is amplified. Our children will grow up in a world where they will need to apply and communicate scientific ideas, make sound decisions based upon this understanding, and collaborate with other people to solve important problems. The Nanotechnology Research and Development Act provides important support to improve the education of children in this country. Although important first steps, I question whether this act will provide sufficient resources to make a difference for all children. The advances in nanoscience requires a commensurate response from the educational community. As such, the financial resources needed to make this response possible must be provided by the national government with the private sector sharing in this responsibility. To provide world-class science education so that all children learn ideas about nanoscience, our country needs to invest in several important initiatives. First, we need to invest in sustained professional development to support 6th through 12th grade teachers in learning content and an interdisciplinary way of thinking that is pervasive in nanoscience. Many teachers studied science when nanoscience ideas and phenomena they explained had not emerged. Without providing teachers opportunity to learn new content in the interdisciplinary way of thinking, they will not be able to instruct our children in these emerging science areas. Sustained professional development is also needed to help teachers learn new pedagogical strategies and teaching techniques. We have learned much in the last 10 years about how to promote science learning, but unfortunately, many of these practices are not seen in schools and science classrooms. Second, our country needs to develop new standards and assessments that focus on the core ideas of science, including those central to nanoscience. Although the National Science Education Standards moved this country forward in promoting standard-based reform, their standards are now at a stage for renovation, as that they do not include ideas related to nanoscience and still cover too many ideas that prevent learners from developing useful understanding. We also need to provide incentives to align all states in this country with this new shared vision of science teaching and learning. Third, This country needs to develop new instructional resources, including new learning technologies. Most instructional materials used in classrooms today do not include emerging science ideas and do not include the latest ideas about how children learn. Fourth, we need to ensure that 6th through 12th grade science classrooms have appropriate equipment and facilities to allow all students to experience and explore doing science. When not feasible, partnerships with private sectors and universities need to provide this equipment. Fifth, we need to redesign undergraduate education, including science teacher preparation programs, so that new ideas in science and learning and the interdisciplinary manner of thinking that nanoscience incorporates are included. It is only through revamping undergraduate education, including teacher preparation, that we will make lasting changes in science education. We need teachers who understand emerging ideas in science and the new ideas in teaching and learning. As such, we need to provide incentives to attract the very best student science majors in the teaching careers. Finally, we need to build partnerships with the private sector in sharing in the cost of this effort. In summary, to ensure all children in this country has access to world-class science education that will help them understand nanoscience and prepare them for fruitful lives in the future economy, we need to provide sustained professional development, renovate science education standards, develop and test new instructional materials, provide for appropriate equipment and resources, and redesign undergraduate education, and build partnerships with the private sector. Thank you for the opportunity to express my professional view.
Dr. Maynard, I have some good news and bad news for you. The good news is that 99% of your recommendations were incorporated into a bill that we passed and the President signed last year called American Competes Act. Amazingly, you recited the bill, basically. The bad news is that the tree doesn't fall if you don't hear it, and that we have not been able to get the proper funding, or any funding really, for the bill yet. However, working with Dr. Ehlers, we're working in a bipartisan way to try to at least start that funding process. We have circulated a letter. Again, we have several members on that. I see representatives from Texas Instrument here. They've been a part of bringing together, I think, 175 to 200 major industries and associations, also recommending that the Competes Act, American Competes Act, gets funded. So hopefully, at least the good news there is we have the authorization, and we are working very hard to try to get the funding for your almost exact recommendations. Now, Dr. David, Dr. Ehlers, would you like to? Excuse me. Do you have any? You want to just say amen? Amen. Okay. Amen, brother. All right, Dr. Maynard, thank you. You're recognized.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you, Chairman Gordon, Mr. Ehlers, and the members of this committee for holding today's hearing. My name is Dr. Andrew Maynard. I'm the Chief Science Advisor to the Project on Emerging Nanotechnologies, which is a partnership between the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and the Pew Charitable Trusts. But of course, the views I express here are my own. Nanotechnology is counterintuitive. It involves a world where materials just don't play by the rules as we know them, but demonstrate many strange and wonderful behaviors. Metals change color, inert materials become highly reactive, what was once weak becomes strong. For instance, if you take a material like this is nanoscale titanium dioxide, it looks like a mundane white powder. But this material's superfine structure, which is invisible to the naked eye, allows this particular material to be used to kill microbes, make self-cleaning windows, and ensure that mineral-based sunscreens go onto the skin transparently. Because nanotechnology is counterintuitive, safe nanotechnologies will not just happen. We will need leadership and guidance to help overcome our human-scale perspective and ensure the rulebook for safe nanotechnology is built on sound science. In this context, I want to highlight 5 areas I believe are essential to underpinning the development of safe and therefore successful nanotechnologies. First and foremost, I believe we need a top-level research strategy that identifies the goals of nanotechnology risk research across the federal government and provides a roadmap for achieving these goals. Secondly, I strongly believe a minimum of 10% of the federal government's nanotechnology R&D budget should be dedicated to goal-oriented environmental, health and safety research. Any less than this will risk compromising the success of emerging nanotechnologies. Thirdly, a coordinator should be appointed with responsibility for overseeing and implementing a nanotechnology environmental health and safety research strategy across the country. Fourthly, public-private partnerships are needed that leverage government and industry funds to address critical nanotechnology oversight issues in an independent, transparent, and timely manner. And finally, government actions to support the development of safe nanotechnologies must be transparent. Without transparency, there is no clear foundation for enabling strategic planning or engendering trust within industry or the public. I think it's fair to say that transparency has been an issue for safety research so far within the NNI. Recently, the National Nanotechnology Initiative announced that $68 million was spent on nanotech risk-related research in fiscal year 2006. But as has happened many times now, no clear supporting data were given for this figure. Sifting through the research claimed to be relevant to nanotechnology safety, I could only find $13 million that was invested in research that is highly relevant to addressing the health and environmental impacts of nanotechnology for 2006. The same analysis, and this is somewhat interesting, the same analysis for research in Europe over the same period reveals an investment of $24 million in nanotech safety research over the same period. Unlike the NNI, the information that this analysis is based on is freely available on the web for anyone to see and anyone to verify. The bottom line here is that without supporting evidence, any assessment of what the government is doing to address nanotechnology impacts is quite simply not worth the paper it is written on. Nanotechnology will not succeed through wishful thinking. Instead, it will depend on clear and authoritative leadership from the top. The proposed National Nanotechnology Initiative Amendment Act of 2008 addresses each of the areas I have just highlighted, and in my personal opinion supports the leadership necessary for the successful development of safe nanotechnologies. I personally commend the committee for promoting transparency through a public database of research. This will complement the International Public Database on Environment, Health and Safety Research to be launched by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in June of this year. I also believe the proposed Act takes an important step in assigning to a single coordinator the responsibility for ensuring that an adequately funded and leveraged top-down strategic plan for nanotechnology EH&S research is developed and implemented. When I look back on the origins of the NNI, I'm impressed by the foresight and quality of leadership exerted by congressional visionaries on both sides of the aisle, together with the President and the executive branch, scientists and engineers, business people and educators. But perhaps because of the tremendous success achieved in the laboratory since its creation, we do risk losing sight of the challenges involved in taking the NNI to the next level of research, education, governance and commercialization. It is my belief that with the proposed Act and with the continued vigilance of this committee, this will not happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Maynard, and Dr. David is recognized.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Dr. Raymond David. I'm a toxicologist with BASF Corporation, but I'm here on behalf of the American Chemistry Council Nanotechnology panel to speak in favor of the NNI Amendments Act of 2008. The infrastructure that this amendment will provide will greatly improve the ability of the U.S. to plan, coordinate, and implement research programs, especially ones that are focused on the safe use of nanotechnology. The infrastructure and focus will be welcome in an area that's seen an explosion of research and experimental data in the scientific literature, but not necessarily always focused on addressing any one particular issue. Under the NNI amendment, a central federal research oversight function will be created to address specific research questions and provide the capability to utilize all the federal research resources available to answer any one particular questions, much like other governments around the globe. This central oversight will bring the strengths of organizations such as the EPA, NIH, NCTR, and the National Characterization Laboratory together to resolve a particular question, and they can do that in a fashion that will be much faster than academia or industry alone could resolve. The amendments mandate that the NNI provide information to the academic and industrial research communities on current research programs so that we can reduce the redundancy on some of the experiments we see, available techniques and methodologies, and facilities that can support robust scientific research. This information will be welcome in an area that we've seen a lot of redundancy in terms of the scientific literature, and hopefully gain acceptance of a minimal characterization evaluation parameters so that people will know exactly what the characteristics of the nanomaterials are that they are testing. This is something that is presently lacking and would otherwise make their research uninterpretable. The ACC strongly supports the intention to educate all stakeholders, especially the public, on nanotechnology. I think we're at a crossroads in terms of the public perception with respect to the uses of nanomaterials. Some of the information that the public receives from the media tends to overemphasize the uncertainties of nanotechnology. We believe that it's important that the public understand the true risks and benefits of this technology and the nanomaterials that are being used. And they need to receive that in a very clear, straightforward manner. Of course, these amendments and the infrastructure that they create does not guarantee success. The proof is really in the pudding. The implementation is what's important. The ACC would like to re-emphasize that a comprehensive, prioritized federal research strategy focusing on EHS concerns is still missing. What we need to do is we need to focus on assessments of risks to health and the environment. We need to promote new interdisciplinary relationships. We need to support better understanding of the fundamental properties of nanomaterials and how that impacts the risk assessment. We need to develop processes for establishing standard protocols so that individuals and maybe categories of nanomaterials can be evaluated. We need to clearly delineate the responsibilities, programs, timelines, and anticipated results of funded projects. And I think we need to leverage planned research that's ongoing throughout the world, particularly in the OECD. We have previously urged an independent review by the National Research Council's Board on Environmental Studies and Toxicology to establish research priorities for manufactured nanomaterials. The panel continues to believe that that is an important effort that should be pursued so that we can develop a comprehensive roadmap with appropriate projects and priorities and evaluation metrics. The nanotechnology panel member companies want to foster a responsible application of nanotechnology. We want to share and coordinate EH&S research initiatives, and we want to facilitate the exchange of information. We look forward to working with the Congress and then NNI to make the implementation of these amendments a success. We hope the bill will be passed, and we look forward to that happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. David. And finally, Dr. Doering, you're recognized.
Chairman Gordon, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the National Nanotechnology Initiative Amendments Act of 2008. Texas Instruments and the Semiconductor Industry Association view two topics as key to the legislation. First, identification of areas of national importance, and second, translation of basic research into commercialization. These are essential to ensuring that the NNI program maintains U.S. leadership in nanotechnology and contributes to U.S. economic competitiveness. Appropriately, the bill identifies 4 areas of national importance: electronics, healthcare, energy, and water purification. This will prioritize interagency activities and resources around nanotechnology research to address critical challenges facing our country. PI and SIA are encouraged that electronics is the first area listed and strongly advocate that it be renamed as nanoelectronics. Nanoelectronics will actually play a key role in essentially every area of national importance. It will enable improved information processing, communications, imaging, and sensor technologies that will assist in addressing energy challenges, improving health care, and detecting national security threats. Advanced nanoelectronics research is needed because the CMOS technology that the semiconductor industry has used for over 30 years is projected to reach its performance, energy efficiency, and cost limits by the year 2020. In 2005, 6 U.S. semiconductor companies formed a consortium, the Nanoelectronics Research Initiative, to provide industry funds to universities to accelerate this research. Today, the NRI leverages funding and expertise from industry, NSF, and NIST, as well as contributions from state and local governments, and supports research at 35 universities and 4 regional centers. This collaboration model can be replicated to address other national challenges with nanotechnology research. The draft legislation recognizes and encourages such models. To effectively pursue research in the areas of national importance, universities and federal labs will need adequate resources for research funding and essential equipment. NNI investments in the areas of national importance should be reported in the same manner that they currently are for the program component areas. The bill recognizes that basic nanotechnology research should lead to commercial applications. Industry can play an important role in establishing a balance between directed basic research and its potential commercialization by providing insights on appropriate goals and needs for both. For example, there are a number of candidates for new nanoelectronics devices, but to be viable, these must be capable of being manufactured in commercial volumes at low cost. This may require an entirely new nanomanufacturing paradigm. Also, as we move nanoelectronics to even smaller dimensions, the metrology challenges will only increase, an important role for NIST. Thus, the bill's call for instrumentation and tools for nanoscale manufacturing is a significant element for the semiconductor industry. In addition, the draft legislation rightly identifies the important role of state leverage through research, development, and technology transfer initiatives. The state of Texas, the University of Texas System, and Texas Industry collaborated to establish a $30 million complementary package of leveraged funding to attract and support top academic researchers at the Southwest Academy of Nanoelectronics, which is one of the regional centers in NRI. Currently, NRI state and local leverage for all regional centers totals about $15 million annually. In conclusion, while the legislation establishes an important framework, corresponding appropriations will need to follow. We look forward to continuing our work with this committee to successfully achieve the funding goals of America Competes and the President's American Competitiveness Initiative as the National Nanotechnology Initiative Amendments Act of 2008 moves towards final passage. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Doering. You're absolutely right. We've got to do more than authorize. We've also got to follow up with those appropriations. Thank you. At this point, we will open ourselves for the first round of questions, and the chairman recognizes himself. There's been a lot of discussion this morning about health and safety and environmental concerns about nanotechnology. Let me tell you 2 reasons that I'm particularly concerned about that. One is my 7-year-old daughter, and I know all of us have reasons of some nature of that same interest. And the other is I want to make sure that America gets as much of a bang for buck out of our investment as we can. I want us to be first to market. I want us to be able to create jobs in this country built around nanotechnology. And as a son of a farmer, I am haunted to some extent about what I've seen with genetically altered grain. I've seen how it has been rejected, even though in my opinion, I think we've had good research to the contrary around the world. I don't want that to happen here, and I think that means we've got to get out in front. There's already 600 products on the market, and it concerns me that we're going to have a horror story with some, 1 out of 600, and it could put a taint on the entire industry. And for that reason, the draft bill requires that 10% of the NNI's total funding be designated for the environmental health and safety research component area there at NNI. This would be about $150 million under the current 2009 request. Now, this is a provision that has been really recommended by a number of areas, number of companies within industry, academia, NGOs. It's consistent with the National Academy of Science 2006 review of NNI, but it's not unanimous. And Dr. or Mr. Kvamme, you are quoted, and I have stated, and I'll quote, that it is misguided and may have the unintended consequence of reducing research on beneficial applications and on risk. So let me ask you, do you feel like your panel is satisfied with the current level of funding on health, environment, and safety?
Well, as I mentioned in my testimony, and in our report, we call for increased spending in that area, and particularly since the industry is picking up more and more research funding in the nano area, we think the government's role will, in fact, change. As you know very well, the 2009 request...
Change in what direction?
In an increasing direction. In the 2009 request...
An increasing direction of, you said it's going to change from what to what?
More spending in the EHS area is requested and is happening. It's roughly double the 2006 numbers, from $37 to $76 million in the 2009 area. So I think that will happen.
So did your panel discuss an appropriate level?
We talked about what is happening and what is the strategy behind what is happening. We've reviewed the NEHI report. We have not yet, because it just came out in February. We looked more at what activities are in that, and we believe that the activities called for in that report and in the subsequent EPA research strategy are appropriate things to fund, and we believe that these funding levels can support that level of research.
So would it be fair to say that you're not satisfied with the current level, think there should be additional spending, but do not want to put a specific 10% floor?
I think that's a fair statement. Namely, we have encouraged the increased spending in this area. Now, the particular area that we do call out that we haven't mentioned yet is in NIOSH. We believe that the workplace is the most critical area, and we do call for an acceleration of the funding in the NIOSH area.
I know some of the witnesses have a contrary view, and so, excuse me, what I'd like to do is for each of the witnesses to respond to Mr. Kvame's statement and see what recommendation you would have. And so we'll start and go straight down.
As I said earlier, we don't know the exact appropriate level for this funding. We think 10% is ultimately a reasonable estimate, but that that should be determined by the strategic planning process. I think Dr. David mentioned the National Academy's BEST study, which we've also supported to figure out what that number is. I think it's also important that we continue to make the investments in some of the characterization and metrology equipment, the measurement techniques, in particular for the workplace exposure. Absolutely.
If there was a strategic review that determined that there should be a base level of funding, that you would go along with that?
Correct.
Go right ahead, sir.
This really isn't my area of expertise, so I will pass on comments with respect.
As my mother said, if you don't have something good to say, just don't say anything at all. That's a good policy to follow. Yes, Dr.
Let me just start by saying I very much agree with Mr. Kvamme that NIOSH is one of those agencies that is doing tremendous work with virtually no dollars to do it. And that is a critical area where more investment is needed if we're going to make real progress towards developing safe nanotechnologies. If you look at funding in general, one thing I think is indisputable. We need more money to do targeted EH&S research. If we don't have more money, we will not get the answers that people need in order to make good decisions. And that means you've got to set some sort of guidelines. And you can do it one of two ways. You can either set a baseline level, say $100 million, $150 million a year, which are the figures that are being recommended, or you can set it as a percentage of the overall funding for nanotechnology research. I actually think it makes it simpler to set that 10% level, and it's a reasonable level. Any less than that, it's really hard to see how we're going to get the information we need in order to ensure the safety and success of these technologies. But that funding has got to be allayed with a strategy. You cannot just look at the dollars. You've got to understand where those dollars are going, what you're going to achieve with them. And if you don't have that strategy, if you don't have that accountability, you could put $100, $200 million per year in this area and achieve absolutely nothing.
Dr. David.
I think Andrew's made some very good points, and I agree with him. I think that it's very difficult to come up with an exact figure, and certainly a percentage probably is the most appropriate way to approach it. Whether 10% is the correct number or some other percentage, I think that that's a difficult question to answer without having some external recommendation. I can tell you that within industry, companies can spend anywhere from 2 to 5% of their budget on R&D efforts. Pharmaceutical companies, 15%, and that simply is a reflection of the kinds of products that they are generating, what is required to determine that those products are safe for consumer uses. And so 10% lies somewhere in between that number and is probably as reasonable a starting point as any. But I think that it is probably an excellent idea to have the national academies come back with an actual recommendation. That seems to make the most sense to me.
Just for your information, a part of the bill does set forth a strategic plan that will develop for each agency. And so we hope to get that good advice. Yeah. And the Academy is reviewing that plan now. And finally, Dr. Doering.
The semiconductor industry is certainly very interested in ES&H and feels it's an important topic. The SIA, in fact, has a committee on environmental safety and health. The industry has 2 R&D consortia in the U.S., the Semiconductor Research Corporation as well as Semitech, which co-fund a center on environmentally benign manufacturing for semiconductors at the University of Arizona, and it has partner universities around the country that are part of that center as well. In addition, the International Technology Roadmap for Semiconductors, which is a very detailed document, approximately 1,000 pages of the research needs that we have for our industry, the pre-competitive needs, has a whole chapter on environmental safety and health, which goes into a lot of detail on very specific things, including some in the area of nanoelectronics. However, we haven't really done the kind of analysis that would put any particular number on what this need is. I definitely agree with most everyone else that some kind of analysis is appropriate to figure out what the plan would call for in terms of a figure, but the semiconductor industry can't suggest any number at this point.
Thank you, and Dr. Eller, excuse me for running over time, and that certainly will extend to you or others that might have a threshold question like that.
Thank you. I timed it at 30 minutes. No, seriously. A lot of good questions, good answers, but I'd just like to pin this down a bit. First of all, how is the 10%, singling that out, how is that going to affect the other research that is done? Mr. Kvamme, I'd like to have you give me some overview of how you see this working. Let me add another question to the mix. So many different agencies and organizations involved. We're using different bookkeeping methods. How are we going to specify the 10% and make sure that it's fairly administered? So 2 questions. How do you do it? How do you administer it fairly? Secondly, what impact is that likely to have on the other research programs out there?
Well, let me try the second one first. That's part of the reason I inserted the graph that I did in my written statement, which lists the 13 agencies that do EHS research against the 5 different question areas that the NEHI report outlined as the questions. it seems to me what would have to happen, and I am no authority on governmental processes or appropriations or those kinds of things. That's not where I come from. But it seems like what you would then have to do is go down the 13 agencies and essentially say, okay, NIH, you've got to spend 6.7%, and NIST, you've got to spend X percent, and EPA, you've got to spend 18.7%, et cetera. You'd have to do something because they set the goals. And then somebody would have to then sum the total and say, whoops, we're at 9.6, we need 0.4, and twist NSF's arm to increase their thing a bit or something like that. I don't understand that process. That's not what I'm saying. So I think that's the practical issue that I see from our analysis, because you have to understand these organizations voluntarily joined the NNI. And in the early days of our first report, we were twisting arms to get people to become part of the program to start with. And by the way, are still twisting a couple of arms, which we think are important to join. DOL and Department of Education have come along. So I think that is an issue relative to how you would do it, but that's in your hands. I just point that out as the practical thing. Now, obviously, the other issue that you have is the $1.5 billion supports a lot of buildings, a lot of instrumentation, a lot of other kinds of things. If you actually talk about dollars and cents going to researchers, the numbers, the 76 million that's talked about now, is probably pretty close to a high single-digit number. I can't say a specific number because I don't have that breakout at my hands, but it would obviously mean that the other research would be 0.9 of what it's been. But the other point that I would make that I think is very, very important to realize is that the application of the applications research embodies EHS research in a number of areas. For example, at NIH, with our discussions with them, they have to worry about the health implications. The example I like to use is, in isolation, nobody would agree to chemotherapy. It's not good for you. The plus is that it does good stuff. It eliminates cancer cells. And so you have to have that balance. Now, if you're working on a chemotherapy drug, are you working on EHS issues or are you working on cancer cures? That's a tough question to answer. And how many dollars are you allocating to the EHS piece of what you're doing versus the application piece? The way the numbers are done now, and I'm sure the way Andrew came up with $13 million is, he says zero, I suspect, for the EHS piece in that research. I don't happen to agree with that assessment and to think that 68 million in 06 is accurate.
Thank you. A good example of your cancer case. I don't know if you saw the 60 Minutes program Sunday evening where they were injecting gold nanoparticles into patients, which are selectively absorbed by the cancer cells, then using radio waves to heat them up and destroying the cells.
Amazing stuff.
And it's a classic example of exactly what you were talking about. No one knew what the impact would be, and it would take considerable time to find out. I appreciate your comments on that. Dr. Maynard, you, in a similar vein, you said you're not sure how these decisions are made, who decides. Dr. Maynard, you said you need leadership from the top. What do you mean by the top?
Somewhere above the federal agencies themselves, probably within OSTP. And I say that, going back to your question of how could you make this 10% work, you can see ways you could make it work if you actually had somebody at a top level that was working with the agencies to ensure that that 10% funding was actually being correctly allocated across the agencies. So you've got a partnership there, but that partnership would only occur and only succeed if you had coordination and leadership from the highest possible level within government. So that's what I was thinking about in terms of leadership. It's actually making sure that somebody's pulling the process forward rather than it's being pushed forward from the bottom up, in which case it's pretty much a lottery whether you're going to do the right thing or the wrong thing there. At least with leadership, you're sure you're heading in something approximating to the right dimension. I'd also, if you'll allow me, like to address the issue of what research is being done in the area of EH&S issues, and also whether that will impact on looking at the development of applications research and basic research. This is a critical issue because there is no point in funding basic research and applications research if we get the risk side of things wrong. We just will not see any of that translate into viable products. So we've got to put a realistic amount of our investment, our research investment, into understanding the risks. Now, the way we do that has got to be fairly sophisticated, and Mr. Kvamme was right. My $13 million is specifically looking at questions that ask things like, if you have this titanium dioxide, how am I going to use it safely? That's a question you won't find answered by looking at cancer research. It's a question you would only answer by asking very specific questions. But you've got to be more sophisticated than that. You've also got to look at how other areas of research can be applied to understanding environmental safety and health. And if you look at our written testimony, we actually delve into that level of sophistication. But the first and foremost thing we need to do is ask the obvious questions. How can you ensure the nanotechnologies being developed now are as safe as possible? We will not do that by trying to tag along to applications-based research. We've got to ask those specific questions, and that's what is not being done at the moment.
Dr. Krajcik, I just wanted to make a brief comment. Since I've spent so much of my life trying to improve math science education, I agree with your comments. This is another example of an area where we desperately need education. I can see all kinds of horror stories getting propagated on the net or through the media about nanotechnology based on some incidents that might happen in the future, and the public just doesn't have the capability to decide. So education is certainly has to be an important part of this. One last question, Dr. David, in your testimony you commented about we need to. You had a whole list of things we need to do. My question is, who's going to pay for it? Would you expect industry to carry this out? Do you think that we should appropriate money to do all those different things?
Well, I think it has to be a coalition. I think that it has to be a coalition of industry, of government-sponsored programs that support academia or support programs within the various federal agencies. That's the task can be so enormous, and some of the development of the technology can be so daunting that I think it will require that kind of coalition in order to get to the answers that we need to do, at least in a timely fashion.
Thank you all for your responses, for your testimony. I'm just fascinated with this topic because it has such enormous potential, and it can change our lives in ways we can't imagine. And yet, I don't think we quite have a handle on how we're going to use it, what we're likely to find, and above all, what the dangers are. And I'm not one of these people who cries wolf at every corner, but I'm afraid, given the history of what's happened with pesticides and other things, that the public, and especially the public service agencies or entities, will be waiting to jump on the first incident and try to create a 3-mile island out of it. So we face a very ticklish job here together, and I appreciate your willingness to come here and help us understand it better. Thank you.
Ms. Hooley's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I, too, am very concerned about the educational piece. There are a lot of things that I'm concerned about in nanotechnology. I think it also has enormous potential for the future, and I appreciate all of you being here to testify today. When we had a hearing on this last fall, several witnesses spoke of the importance of early nanotechnology education for generating awareness and excitement about nanotechnology, particularly for young students and, in fact, the general public. Do you feel like this legislation accomplishes those two goals, how the general public views nanotechnology? Do you think people understand what nanotechnology is? And do you think it is, what kind of a job do you think we're doing with nanotechnology in our schools? Anyone on the panel would like to answer? Don't be bashful.
Well, I think we have a long ways to go. I think some of the fundamental ideas that underlie nanotechnology, our society is pretty naive about. Most people don't even understand where the nano range lies. They have a hard time distinguishing, once something gets smaller than a cell or a hair, it's undistinguishable. It's not there. So most of our children, most of our adult population does not understand even the scale that we're talking about, let alone some of the important underlying concepts. The wonderful thing about nanotechnology is actually brought new ideas to us. Dr. Maynard raised some of these, that we now know that when you get down to the nano level, materials now get new properties.
Right.
Those ideas aren't even in our science textbooks. We have science textbooks out there that don't have those ideas in it. Kids are learning that, properties are always the same. They don't learn the idea that as you change scale, properties change. We have a long way to go. Our country is in serious, serious trouble when it comes to educating our children and the population with respect to nanotechnology. We have some efforts. I know that the NICE network, the Informal Science Education Group, is trying to do something through the museums. The Center for Nanoscale Center for Engineering and Science is doing things, but we have a lot more that we have to be able to do because it's not pervasive in our schools. It certainly isn't in any of our standards, and unless it gets into our standards, unless we start testing for it, we're not going to see it in schools. So we have a long ways to go if we're really going to make a difference. If you want to speak about safeties, our kids can't decide. No one knows. We put you mentioned sunscreen. We don't know when you put this. It makes us. We don't see the white stuff on our face anymore. That's good. We look nice when we're at the beach, and it keeps away the ultraviolet light. But we don't know if it's harmful to us, and we don't have the resources. People generally don't have the resources to make that decision. They don't even know, should I be worried about it? That's a problem. We can make the decision that, okay, I'm going to put this on, and it might penetrate my skin, and it might do something bad to me 30 years down the line. But people should be able to make that decision, and right now they don't have the intellectual resources to even make those kind of decisions. So I think we have a lot of work that we have to do and to educate our country so that we are more informed citizens.
What's the one thing that you would do? I'll just stay with you, Dr. Krajcik. What's the one thing we should do to, in fact, make the public more aware, make sure that our students are more aware of nanotechnology, what is possible with nanotechnology, as well as what are some of the problems with nanotechnologies?
Well, I wish I could say there was one thing. It isn't. It's a big complex system, right?
You can give me 2 or 3 things.
All right, so that's what I tried to outline that's what I tried to outline very clearly. I think we really have to do sustained professional development. I think we have to change our national science education standards. They did our country good, but they are old and they need to get revamped with new emerging ideas in science. We have to have new instructional materials. We have to provide resources for our classrooms. And we have to change our undergraduate programs, both so that kids in both that are taking the science classes, but also in our teacher preparation programs. Unless we do all those things, we are always going to be in this mess that we are in this country. We will never we'll never see ourselves back in the forefront with respect to science.
For any of the panelists, how involved do you think businesses need to be in helping us reach the public in general and our educational institutions? Dr. Maynard?
Very involved, but I think this is something that both business and government have got to be involved with, simply because you've got the two sides of education. You've got the side of education where you're enthusing people so that they really understand and invest time and effort into nanotechnology and become the next generation of nanotechnologists. But also you've got the aspect of empowering people to make informed decisions and actually engage in the process of nanotechnology and science in a broader sense. That cannot all be done by industry. Some of it can be, but it's got to be done in partnership with other organizations, including the government.
I'm just curious again.
Ms. Hooley, if you don't mind, I'm sorry, we're going to have to be a little stricter on our 5 minutes. We're going to have votes in 10 or 15 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can take.
And we'll get back to you if we can.
I would love to want to have a dialogue.
Oh, this is very important. Hopefully this will be the start of an ongoing dialogue, both formal and informal. Ms. Biggard, you are recognized for crisp 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Murdock, I've been amazed at the rapid growth of nanotech startups in my district, many of which I think you are familiar with. And many of these startups are commercializing nanotechnologies developed from basic nano research at places like Northwestern or the Center for Nanomaterials at Argonne. Do these startups face the same challenges that other small startups do, or are the challenges different because they are trying to build a business around nanotechnology?
Thank you very much. I believe that some of the challenges are the same and some are, I'll call it, more acute. These startups are different than software or information technology-based startups. They require more capital and they require much longer development cycles. You know, this isn't a business model that, you know, when I was at Kellogg, friends could leave and start a company and scale something out in a couple years on a couple $1 million. It takes a lot longer. And it takes a lot more investment to make it go. And so we often talk about the valley of death, right? The period between, you know, the formation of the company and when you start to generate, you know, revenues and cash flows. And many of these technologies that come off, whether they be Argonne Federal Laboratories or the startups, are platform-oriented technologies, and there's a fair amount of research and development to make it robust, repeatable, scalable, and all those wonderful things before you can actually manufacture a product on it and create revenues. And that's where, you know, programs like the SBR, the STTR, and the TIP are very helpful.
So do you think that the tech transfer provisions in the draft bill will address these unique challenges?
I think that they will be helpful. I think there are other, you know, I understand the SBR reauthorization is coming up, and there are some changes in that program that will also be helpful. So they certainly move the needle in the right direction, and will help the efforts to commercialize these technologies.
Mr. Doering, do you think that that the bill will help these challenges?
One of the aspects that hasn't been mentioned yet with regard to that is the role of the states, which is encouraged by the bill. The states obviously have a lot of interest in creating jobs locally and new business locally. And as I mentioned in my testimony, we've had some success through our consortia and working with the states. And I believe that role we need to continue to encourage.
Again, Mr. Murdock and Mr. Doering, there's been a lot of talk today about what the government can and should be doing, and to what degree, or 10% or more or less, to address EHS issue. But what's the what role can business play, and what role should business play to address ESH issue and help American consumers better understand the health and safety implications of nanotech technology and nano products themselves?
If I could respond to that briefly. Obviously, businesses are responsible and accountable to make sure their products are safe. That's true for nanotechnology. That's true with everything. You know, the member companies, you know, it's important to understand that most of these companies are ultimately in the research phase. They're developing a prototype. Most of these technologies are not yet to the market, but they need to do the safety testing, and they do based upon what's known to ensure that those are safe. The government, you know, we've talked about, needs to develop the standards and the characterization protocols, if you will, to characterize these materials and the test methods to continue to evolve those based on the state of the science, to having our best understanding of what is in fact safe, and then industry needs to apply that. As just a little segue, members of the NanoBusiness Alliance have invited NIOSH out to their facilities to monitor, to take measurements on the site of the air quality, to test for nanoparticulate, you know, matter in the air. Members are participating in the EPA's voluntary nanomaterials stewardship program, and so businesses engaging in those ways and trying to help provide the information to improve our state of knowledge.
Thank you. Mr. Doering, do you have anything to add?
Yes, speaking for the semiconductor industry, as I mentioned earlier, we take ES&H very seriously. Most of us have very large ES&H departments within our companies that work closely with the parts of the federal government that help control new materials generally, whether or not they're classified as nanotechnology. As new nanomaterials come along, we take a very hard look at each one before incorporating them. We're also interested in the educational aspects on this. We primarily do that in collaboration with each other through our trade association, the Semiconductor Industry Association, which has sponsored some studies in this area, and we would be glad to work through them and the federal government in any further educational program.
I guess we've gotten over the Michael Crichton book, Pray.
Thank you, Ms.
very
Bigler.
much. I yield back.
Thank you. And Ms. Woolsey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually sit here today as an example of the benefits of nanotechnology. On March 5th, I had huge back surgery. Here I am back at work, have been for the last 3 weeks, and I have some of the brilliance of your industry implanted in my back. So thank you very much. I agree with what you're saying. Luckily, we have 3 members on this committee, myself, Congressman Ellers, and Congresswoman Biggert, who are also on the Education and Labor subcommittees. And we will be reauthorizing, fixing, making better No Child Left Behind. Therefore, I was looking out here at you beautiful men, you're great, but you're all white, you're all within, a 10 or 15 year span there. Well, you said it, I didn't. We've got to get every kid and every young person involved in the future of this country, which is the new technologies, the nanotechnologies, the green technologies that we are going to be able to keep in this country, hopefully, not come up with all the good ideas in science and then give it away to the rest of the world. We have to do that. So I'm going to tie this right back now to education and labor and No Child Left Behind. I'd like to know from you, what has your association or what have you done yourselves in order to give us feedback on what is missing in this picture? We've got to hear it from you. Have you been participants?
If I can make a couple of comments. The first thing is to open up. We live in a society, my parents were carpenters. Yours were farmers, as the chairman indicated. You could know what your parent did for a living. That's no longer true for many people today. I had a unique experience some 30 years ago, which I will never forget. We had our company picnic where 1,000 people usually came. Of our 9,000 employees, we decided to hold it at the plant, have an open house, and 23,000 people showed up. People want to know what mom and dad do for a living, and we don't do that very well in our industries, and we don't do it because of legal concerns, insurance concerns, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We've got to change that. We have got to open up, and if there's any way legislation can do that, I highly encourage it. I'm no expert in legislation, but open up our companies so people don't drive down rows of buildings and have a clue what's going on in those buildings. The second thing I would say is that when you're talking about education, you've got to be careful. This is the point I tried to make in my testimony relative to nanotechnology and technology. What we've found is people don't go into technology. They go into curing cancer. They go into doing better energy research. They go into, going to the moon. They go into application kinds of things, and nanotechnology is a tool to that end. What we've learned at the University of California at Berkeley, where I serve on the Engineering Advisory Board, is that this Center for Information Technology in the interest of society, CITRIS, is drawing students right and left because they see end applications for getting that EE degree, that ME degree, that whatever degree it is. They want to see societal things. I think as you introduce that to youngsters at an early age, kids are fascinated by this stuff, but they want to see so what.
Right, they want
and we
the
got
end
to do
result.
the so what.
If I could build on that for a second, the question was asked earlier about the business's role of educating the general public, and I think we're just starting to move into the second wave of nanotechnology commercialization, where you're really seeing some of these, very exciting, transformational applications like solar energy. There's a portfolio of companies that are really changing the cost structure of solar energy so that we're going to see some, meaningful new penetration of that technology. Obviously, the 60 Minutes episode was just referenced in terms of addressing cancer. And so as more and more of these compelling applications come to market, I think it will inspire. There's an old saying, success is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. Having said that, if you don't have the inspiration first, you don't undertake the perspiration to follow. And so I think we'll see more of that. The other thing that we've said in our previous testimony on this issue is that we think it's important that people also think about education from the student's view and not just the teacher. We absolutely agree with all of the investments that need to be made, right, in terms of teacher capability standards and all of that. But to also adopt a student-centric view of the world, engage in more self-directed learning and inquiry-driven learning that's applied and helps people relate as they are educated to the benefits and the applications associated with it.
Thank you, Mr. Murdock, and thank you, Ms. Woosley, and we're glad that you are
like my
our
back.
example here.
Yeah, I'm a good example. Thank you.
And now the temporary but not ostracized ranking member, Mr. Robacher, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have a little cold today, so I'm. By the way, in the future, do you think that think nanotechnology is going to help me with my cold? Is that possible? They eat up those little bacterias or whatever it is that I caught from my children. So let me state something, and you tell me if there's anybody who disagrees with this. From what I'm hearing today, that everybody in the panel believes that nanotechnology has such a great significant promise for our society that it should be a priority for the government and society to develop it and to prepare for it. Would you all agree with that? This should be a priority for us. Well, let me tell you, the biggest impediment that I've seen to progress is that people who believe things that should be a priority for our society are unwilling to prioritize. And I will tell you that we don't need people to come here and tell us simply to spend more money on something. Everybody will tell us to spend more money on something. Now, what I need from you gentlemen is for you to tell me exactly how important it is compared to something else that you would like us to get the funding from. Because I'm open to that idea. For example, fusion was a great dream. I mean, ever since I was a kid, I saw little films how fusion was going to come along. We spent billions of dollars on fusion research, and it continues today. I have asked people, what's the potential of that? And they say, we'll know. If you just spend another $1 billion, we'll know what the potential is. Well, you guys seem to know what the potential of nanotechnology is. Do you think that we should, if you don't, is fusion, or is there someone else you can point to where we're spending a lot of money in research that this should have a priority over? Anybody on the panel is fine.
What I will say is that for every penny we spend in nanotechnology, we also have to spend money in education. And the reason why
okay,
is
let me get to that. No, let me get to that.
Pardon?
I want a priority here. I want where you're going to tell me where not to. I don't want you to go on another education speech.
I'm not going to go on education speech. I just said
where's something that you want to defund? Nothing. Well, let me tell you something.
I'd be happy to give you a suggestion.
You got one, so what is it? What do you got for me?
Fusion. You can defund fusion.
By one count we did, I think there's 220 different federal programs of something sub $10 million apiece for tech education K-12. There's no way that's an efficient spending of money.
There's no way what now?
There's no way that's an efficient spending. You can't have 210 or 20 programs and be efficient. I'd look at those and try to figure out how to spend half the money but do it more.
Okay, so you don't want to defund, you want us to be more efficient. Isn't there anybody that ever
I'll cut it in half.
Well, can someone come here and tell me what area of research is now wasted as compared to the money that you want to spend on this? No. Okay. Well, let me tell you something. People should, in the scientific community, should not come to Congress and tell us that they're willing to say how important something is unless they're willing to compare it to what something is less important, because that doesn't mean anything. We have a limited budget, and we want to do what's right by that budget. I personally would think that nanotechnology should receive a large portion of the money that we should spend or that we will save by eliminating fusion energy research, because it hasn't panned out. Back to education, to my friend who was about to talk about education. One of the problems with what we have found in this committee is that sociology teachers and history teachers and English literature teachers and physical education teachers and basket weaving teachers in high school are demanding that they receive the same pay level as mathematics teachers and science teachers. Do you support a differential in pay that would permit schools to pay more money to education, to mathematics and science teachers?
I think we have to have high-quality math and science teachers.
But you're not willing to say they send more. There's another thing. There are these heavy interest groups in our society. We know that teachers' unions are not going to support somebody else getting more money because it happens to be important for our society.
You know, if it takes getting good science teachers, and we need good science teachers, if it takes paying them more money, then we should pay them more money.
Pay them more money than the other teachers.
If that's the way we can attract
Good.
our best, if the way we can attract our best graduates to go into science teaching,
Yeah.
then I would say let's give them more money.
It's the only way we're going to do it. And to
If that's the case, then I
Yeah.
think we should do it, because we have a lot of really smart
Yeah.
people, and we really need them in
And
education.
we can sing their accolades all day long, but the bottom line is we want more young people to get involved. We want higher quality math and science teachers. We got to pay them more money, and we got to pay more money to our engineers and our scientists, rather than having them tied to sociologists and political scientists, whatever that word is.
Thank you, Mr.
So
O'Barker.
thank you very much.
We hope you feel better. Now, Mr. Honda, we're glad you joined us today, and you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think I share Mr. O'Barker's frustration about the constant barrage of criticism about we need to do more in education. I don't think that Congresswoman Woolsey's question was answered. She asked, what is it that you have done, rather than telling us what you think are some of the factors. And, you know, I'm sure that Dr. Krajcik is a professor of education, and he's spoken about the kinds of things that need to be done in the area of teacher preparation and curricula and those kinds of things. And if you're suggesting that there's over 200 programs that could be cut that's in education, I'd like to know how diverse those programs are before they're consolidated or cut, because for the last 8 years, my friend, you know that education and everything else has been cut, including ATP and other things that require innovative people to be funded to move the science along. So I think the idea of participating and following through with some of the ideas you do have about how to improve education would be of a great help. But being a teacher myself, I'm going to take this moment, Mr. Chairman, if I could. I'll just tell you that all those programs and all the subject matters are important for the development of a good citizen and for development of a society that can reach its highest point. Music, performing arts, they're all embedded with science. And like nano, you know, once we understand nano, we understand that everything that functions in this world is at a nano scale. It's just that we're just getting there. You can't take nano away from technology and accept that things are going to be the same. We suspect that with nano and us messing around in that whole area would push Moore's Law another 50 years out, and probably more. And so I don't disagree that we should be putting money into basic research. I don't disagree that we should be putting money from the feds to partner with industry and with the nascent research to get beyond the gap or the valley of this so they can get to commercialization. But I think that terminologies or rhetoric that is so broad without its detail is it rings hollow to me, and I appreciate this dialogue. I think that the dialogue is needed to be said. And when we concern about ourselves with other countries and say they're doing better than we are, I think we better be prepared to have the details there, because, you know, when people say China has 300,000 engineers, you better be prepared to say, of those, how many are the kinds of engineers and technologists that we have that think new things rather than being civil engineers or, you know, the other kinds of engineers that they need for their own development of their infrastructure in their own country. So, you know, I think that to be precise, then our terminology needs to be precise so we can solve the kinds of problems we face as a country together, and then move forward without the fear of fear, and invest in our own children in the proper way. And that challenge will have to go right down to how we plan our cities, how we look at the issue of equity. Because the way we do things with education is not equity, it's parity. And unless we're willing to change our whole assessment of what a neighborhood is, what a school is, and how we fund our children, then we're not prepared to move forward in education. And just like nanotechnology, it's an eye-opener. Things change when we get to that point. And I appreciate your work, all of your work in the area of nano, because I will have a better fishing pole as a result. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me wax on.
Thank you, Mr. Hunter, for
perhaps they may have a reaction.
If I could just make one quick comment, in terms of what we're doing, and you know, the nanotech companies are relatively small in the grand scheme of things, but we're starting the process of addressing this education. Several member companies that are in the instrumentation business have done R&D to create lower cost machinery so that we can get something that's viable to get into the community colleges and into the classroom so that people can have those hands-on learning experiences. One. Two, the Alliance itself is working with companies to try to set up an internship program in some of these pioneering nanotech companies so that folks can experience firsthand some of the transformational work that's taking place to lead to that inspiration. It's not going to solve things, and it's not going to do it overnight by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a start, and you got to start somewhere.
Mr. Hunter, let me just, I shouldn't have to remind everyone, but I will once again, that last year this committee passed out on a bipartisan basis. The President signed last August the American Competes Act. The American Competes Act does a variety of things. It doubles our investment over a 7-year period in the National Science Foundation and in NIST, in the Office of Science within the Department of Energy. It also goes to the issue of our students in the math and science area, recognizing that it all starts with the teacher, and that we certainly are as bright as any other country around, but you have to have teachers that not only know how to teach, but also have a core knowledge within that subject area. Just very, very quickly, one of the things that we discovered was that 63% of the middle school teachers had neither a major nor a certification to teach math. 93% of the physical science teachers had neither a major or certification. So no matter how good you might be in terms of your ability, you have to have a core knowledge, and that's why within the department, or rather the National Science Foundation, there is a program called the NOIS Scholarship Program that we scaled out that will provide scholarships for those students that want to go into math or science and education and agree to teach for 5 years. It will also bring back those good teachers that need more coursework, stipends for them to come in the summer. They will then be able to get their AP course, their master's, or certification, whatever it might be. There'll be scholarships for those folks that want to go into pure research. You know, we really don't have to argue about this much longer. I mean, we have a plan. When Norm Augustine brought in his group that reported back on the Rising Above the Gathering Storm, I told them that they didn't bring us anything we didn't know. They just put it in a good package. So we don't need to study anymore. We just need to do it, and that means funding it. And I have a letter here that I think it was 225 of the major industries have signed recommending that. As I say, Mr. Ellers and bipartisan effort, and Ms. Biggert, who's not here now, are trying to do that. So hopefully we're going to be able to see that funding, and from that we're going to see the realization of what we've all been talking about. So on that Mr. Lipinski, a beneficiary of that math and science education, is here, and before we hear the bells ring, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have stated many times before that I've drunk the Kool-Aid on nanotechnology, but I don't want anyone to think that because I walked in here with the camera, I was that excited of coming to take your pictures here. And I just came from the White House with seeing the Pope there, so I just wanted to make sure I got back here as soon as I could, though, because I wanted to. I know how important that this is. I believe it's critical that we really do have a investment on behalf of the federal government in nanotechnology. It's really critical for our future. In one area I wanted to ask about, let me throw this out to whoever wants to pick up on this, I want to ask about nanoelectronics. It's certainly an important field, and I'm curious to hear a little more about what is going on right now in nanoelectronics, what research is being conducted, what are really the key things that the research is focusing on right now.
Okay, well, I guess I'll take that one. Nanoelectronics research right now is really focused on how do we replace this incumbent technology that we call CMOS for short. It's just an acronym. I won't go into the details. But it's a technology that we've used for over 30 years now. It's the workhorse of all electronics, big and small, that you see throughout the world today. And we've been miniaturizing it, or scaling it, we like to say in the industry, for these 30 years. And it's reaching some pretty fundamental limits in terms of what it costs per function, to try to make it smaller, what its energy efficiency is, what its speed can be, how much density of storage of information you can get with it. And so the really big grand challenge that the industry is looking at right now in nanoelectronics is how can we find a new component, basically a new transistor, which is the guts of CMOS, that can take us to the next level in cost and energy efficiency and just pure performance. And so this is basically the challenge that the Nanoelectronics Research Initiative has taken up, partnering with, so far with NSF and NIST and the federal government, and with a number of states across the country. And we're hoping that before we have a situation where CMOS completely runs out of gas, that we definitely have a new switch that can replace today's transistor.
Anyone else?
Maybe I could comment. You specifically said electronics, but as you probably know, there's an awful lot of things going on in photonics, where photons are replacing electrons to do certain functions, particularly in the communications sector. And today, you know, we're able now to put 80 simultaneous TV channels under a single fiber. That's largely due to what's happening from the standpoint of the constant miniaturization of what's going on in the photonics world as well. So that's another example. Sean mentioned, and I'm familiar with a company that's using nanomaterials from the standpoint of depositing solar cells, so if they lower the cost dramatically. Again, not electronics, but that's material science, but it's still nano, and it's going to affect electronics because it creates electrons in that particular case. So there's two other examples: photonics and energy case.
Well, I'm going to jump in there. You mentioned that about solar. What else is going on in terms of nano research and development in regard to energy? What kind of projects are going on right now?
I think there's tremendous activity and yet opportunity for more with respect to nanotechnology and energy. I think there's clear recognition now of the immense impact, the potential impact of using nanomaterials for solar energy to absorb more of the energy spectrum and to deposit it in, to use different processes. The way that we make most conventional solar cells right now is a lot like the way a Pentium chip's made in polycrystalline silicon in an expensive fab, et cetera. And the new approaches are using nanomaterials and doing them in more roll-to-roll processes, which is more analogous to the way a newspaper is printed. And so that's one big area. Another is in the battery technologies. There's a lot of work with improving lithium batteries, charge rates, and that. But not just that. Firefly, it's an Illinois company, has figured out how to essentially get the lead out of lead-acid batteries and give new life to that technology, which then becomes an important part of an integrated solar energy system. Fuel cells. I think as you look down almost every aspect of energy. The frontier of what's being explored is nanoscience to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of those technologies.
Thank you, Mr. Lipinski, for blessing this hearing. And now we will yield 5 minutes to Ms. Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I'm kind of proud to be here because I'm from the home state of California. And in California, the California Nanosystems Institute was founded back in 2002. And 2 UC campuses who've been very engaged in that process was both UCLA and UC Santa Barbara, which I attended both of them. So this subject matter is of great interest to me as well. I just wanted to ask one quick question. And I think it's to Dr. Maynard's office and some of the work that you've done. What can we learn from the European Union's approach to nanotechnology risk research?
I don't think anybody has really got this fixed yet, but if you look at what Europe is doing, they're taking a far more strategic and systematic approach to risk-based research. So they're currently in their 7th framework research program where they're investing a lot of research across the board in nanotechnology, but they've specifically focused a number of very targeted research programs asking very specific questions like what is the toxicity of certain nanomaterials, how do you measure exposure to nanomaterials, and half a dozen other projects. So what they're doing is they're starting out by asking what do we need to know if we're going to make this technology succeed, and then they're asking groups of researchers to address those very specific questions, and they're putting a lot of money into it as well. But they're also doing something else which isn't really occurring in the States, and that is they're partnering between government and industry. So every European research project that comes out also has its industrial partners, and that means not only you leveraging money from within government and industry, but you're also using the expertise that you have within those industrial partners who are developing the applications and the technologies which we hopefully are going to see being used. So that is a big difference there. And of course, as I show, even back as far as 2006, if you look at research which is primarily focused on understanding risks, so these very, very specific questions, they're actually investing, or were investing, more in Europe than we were in the US.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Richardson. And before we close, let me also give my thanks to Ranking Member Hall for being a part of the bipartisan group that is signing the letter to our appropriators and the President asking for additional funding in the supplemental for our math and science education for the COMPETES bill. Let me also say that I think this is good work, although this is a working project. Or process, that we have a good draft here. We welcome the good advice we have. We want to get additional advice. We want to get the best bipartisan bill that we can put together on this very important subject, and so I thank our witnesses for being a part of that today. We will leave the record open for additional members that have questions, and with that, the witnesses are excused and the meeting is adjourned.